session. We're actually going to have a panel by the Comptroller's office. Before we do that, I do want to mention that if you need continuing education credits, make sure you find one of the guys, the scanners in the back at the end of this session, in each session going forward. I talked to Ross before, and everybody in the room probably knows Ross. If you have any dealings with any finances with your utility, you've dealt with Ross. I felt it prudent for him to go ahead and introduce his team, so I'm going to pass it along to him.
Right. Thank you, Ethan. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. As Ethan said, most of y'all are familiar with me, but if you're not, my name is Ross Colona. I'm the Assistant Director of Local Government Finance in the Comptroller's office. I also serve as the designated manager for the Tennessee Board of Utility Regulation. That's a mouthful. All y'all really need to know is if I'm calling you, just answer and be honest with me because I'm your regulator. And, we can be friendly if we need to be, but if y'all don't want to be friendly, that's okay too, because I can be mean back at you. So here we have, on my left, we have Megan Huffstutter and Nate Fontenot and Charlie Lester. Y'all may recognize Megan and Nate. They've been running around with me for a few years now. Charlie's kind of new to the scene. Before we had that bald guy, Ben, running around with us, and Ben still is with the Comptroller's office, and he's still doing utilities. He's not here today because I guess, 2 weeks ago, a week ago now, him and his wife just had their first child, so we're stoked for them. Honestly, I think that they just timed it out so he didn't have to come to this conference because it's just kind of a haul to get out of here from Nashville. But so Megan is in charge of Middle Tennessee utilities, Nate does West Tennessee, and Charlie is doing East Tennessee utilities. So I always say try to reach out to them if you need to get a hold of our office. When there's 450 utilities and y'all try to reach out directly to me, I'm going to go ahead and tell you that email is going to be sitting in my inbox for a long time before I get to it. And yeah, there's a really good chance I ain't picking up the phone either because I'm going to be on it with someone else. So get a hold of them. They know how to get a hold of me a whole lot faster, unless you're fortunate enough to have my personal cell phone number. And unfortunately, I give that out too often because my phone don't stop ringing. But with that being said, y'all don't want to hear me just ramble. There's a few other people up here that want to talk, so we're just going to dive into things. But unfortunately, I am going to open up with one little story to really get it going, because I think that's what y'all really like to hear from the Comptroller's office are these stories of the stuff that we get into. And so this one is actually really important because it has to do with the conference in Gatlinburg that TAUD does every year. So when I first started back in 2019, I traveled down to a utility that was having some issues, and we found that none of their board members ever had board training. Okay. Well, a lot of them had served for a lot longer than when prior to the law passing in 2013, I think it was, for utility district board member training. Well, none of them got their training. When we asked them why, they said, well, we didn't even know that we had to get training. Well, the crazy thing about that is we had records that showed they attended the TAUD conference and they attended the legislative update from Don where he talked about the board member training. So that's crazy. It says they were there. But then when we asked him about it, the assistant manager spoke up and he said, all right, I'm just going to be honest with you. Yeah, we scanned in, but then we went and shot some guns. And so we weren't there for that session. Listen, all right. If you're going to go to it's really important to go to these trainings because you find out information that keeps you from getting in trouble with us, right? And so that I just thought it was extremely topical because they were at this conference. They'd have been fine if they just would have listened to Don for an hour, but instead they had to go shoot that AR-15, which I don't blame them. That's a whole lot more exciting than listen to someone like me drone on for a little while. But with that being said, the point of today's discussion is one, and I know that y'all ain't going to do it, and I really wish that you would participate, right? Because I know that y'all mouth off to us all the time and say, I don't understand why the state does this. I don't understand why the state does that. Now is the time to find out why we do what we do. But I know that it's really difficult when you're in a room like this to ask us questions. But I implore you, stop me at any point, stop us at any point and ask a question. Yell at us, get all your frustrations out so we can know where we're doing something wrong, or I can tell you why what we're doing is right and you might be wrong. I'm happy to have that conversation in a public forum. So with that being said, I just have some general questions that we get asked a lot that we're just going to go over, and you're going to get to hear from my staff and hopefully become more familiar with them. So when it comes to the T-Board, we do a lot of things when it comes to financial regulation, managerial regulation, and a little bit of technical regulation. The biggest moniker that we have when it comes to utilities is financial distress. Um, And so let's just open this up because a lot of people hear that word financial distress, but they don't really understand what it means. So, any of my staff, what is financial distress and how does a utility find themselves in it? And what are some of the things they can do to prevent that?
Yeah, so I guess I'll go ahead and answer that one. The technical definition of financial distress would just be 2 consecutive years of decrease in statutory net position. And so, what that looks like is just your audited financials for the past 2 years show a decrease in your net position of the utility system. What usually causes that? It can be a wide variety of factors, but honestly, what it usually boils down to is just a utility not reviewing the rates on an annual basis and increasing rates where they need to be. That's the only lever utilities get to pull when it comes to new revenues. And so if you're not raising rates, it maybe doesn't have to be on a yearly basis. That's where third parties come in and do rate studies, and they provide really useful insight and feedback on here's what your rates need to be. Maybe they can be lower in some areas, maybe they need to be higher in other areas. But generally speaking, that's what financial distress is. And oftentimes that's how utilities get there. It's just a lack of control over. There could be spending issues, but a lot of times it's just a lack of increasing in the rates year over year.
So the one other thing that I'll add to that, and I think there's some of y'all that probably heard me say this before, and I really want y'all to listen to this, okay? Y'all are a monopoly. I don't understand how you lose money in a monopoly, right? Like that's what there is no one else that you're competing with. You are selling a necessary product. It's not like you have a monopoly on a product that no one needs. You have a monopoly on a product that people need for their day-to-day life, and you get to charge whatever is just and reasonable. Okay? So you can make as much money as you need to run the business. A lot of times why we see utilities fail financially is because there's sometimes a lack of what's the best way to say this, political desire to raise rates, because a lot of times, I mean, it's unpopular. No one wants to pay more for their utility. They don't have a single problem paying $200 a month for their iPhone. But I mean, you go from $40 to $44 on water and you get people really ticked off at you. But at the end of the day, that's what you have to do. So I really, I struggle sometimes whenever people say, we can't afford this 5% rate increase. No, you can. You can, because you get to charge whatever is just and reasonable in order to make sure that your utility is sufficient. And there's a few other things with financial distress that y'all need to be aware of, but we don't really come across these issues. But even though y'all might want to disagree with me about the 2 years lost, these things you shouldn't disagree with me on why they're bad and why they cause financial distress. And that's defaulting on debt, right? Never default on debt. You default on debt, we're going to have a problem. You and then you can't have a completely negative net position, so your liabilities can't be higher than your assets. That's also bad. You should have more stuff than what you owe, and I really hope that we can all be on board with that. So moving on, one of the biggest things that we struggle with is there is a massive divide between what y'all think we do and what we actually do, and what the best way to communicate those differences are. So, what do y'all feel like are some of the biggest disconnects between the people that we regulate and us as regulators? I don't care. Anyone is able to answer this. No one? That's awesome. I'll answer that one. Okay. Listen, here's the thing. I talk in front of y'all all the time. These folks never get to talk, so we're really trying to get them out of their shell. So y'all are more comfortable talking to them than talking to me. But regardless, so there's a huge disconnect. Y'all really don't understand what we do, and that's totally fine. You don't need to understand what we do, because most of the time I'm really not getting in the middle of y'all unless y'all are doing something wrong. And then, that's always a huge thing, is when you're like, well, we're not doing anything wrong. Why are y'all even here? Listen, I don't like to make work for myself. I would only be dealing with y'all if there's something legitimately wrong. Um, but one of the biggest disconnects, in my opinion, is that utilities, y'all struggle. And when I say y'all, I'm not listen, out of the 450 utilities in Tennessee, roughly, I don't know, 80 some odd are the ones that we call financially distressed. And so the vast majority are definitely financially healthy. So when I say y'all, don't think I'm saying every single utility in Tennessee is dumb, mismanaged, don't know money. That's not what I'm saying. It's just easier for me to say y'all. But so ultimately, utilities miss the forest for the trees when it comes to what financial health is and why we have to get involved. If you tell me, like, Ross, we're not financially distressed. We got $5 million in the bank. That's really cool. But when you're hemorrhaging $250,000 a year, that money's going to run out at some point, right? That's bad. You're running a monopoly. I can't stress that enough. You're running a monopoly. You shouldn't be focusing how much money you have in the bank because you're going to have to spend that money on stuff eventually. You should be making sure that you have the revenue annually to be paying all of your expenses. Because what is one of the biggest reasons that we see people come in front of us? When your expenditures start to supersede your revenues, okay? If you're planning to give your employees a 10% raise and you know that, the cost of your utilities are going up to run your utility. So all your expenses are going up, but then you say, "Nah, we don't need a revenue increase." That's crazy. If I know for a fact that my monthly budget as a person is about to increase $500 a month, I need to find $500 somewhere to cover that. And so there's just a big disconnect on why we're getting involved to begin with, and that's my opinion on that. Um, Anyone else have anything they want to add to that?
I would the one thing I would add, and it's pretty similar to what you were just talking about, Ross, is I think a lot of times when I speak to utilities and to different representatives of local governments, they view us as regulators as essentially a whack-a-mole, where we, are looking for a problem somewhere in the state, and when we find it, we just hit it with a big hammer and say, "Ah, we've solved the problem." That's really we try to be the opposite of that. We in every aspect of what we do, both in our roles as staff to Tibor, and also if you know us as local government finance analysts, we try to come alongside local governments and assist them in areas of difficulty or maybe just in areas of growth. And so we don't get to have to, or we try to avoid arriving at those situations where y'all are in front of the board or having some order for some reason if we can. So I really hope we make that clear when we're talking and when we're up in front of y'all giving presentations that we try not to just come along and say you're doing this wrong and uh, fix it right now, but instead attempt to avoid those problems altogether, and if we can, work to strengthen the utility systems here in Tennessee.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I think overall, if you're following best practices, you're not going to hear from us. It's always better to call us before we call you. Some reasons, for that would be, you have a timely audit, your budget's filed on time, you're not committing crime. If you're doing those things, you're not going to hear from us.
Yep. And I think that's really big, especially on the crime thing. A lot of people don't realize that I see it a lot, especially in rural utilities. They don't think that they're doing anything wrong, and then our office gets involved. And if they find out that they're doing something wrong and it is a crime, a lot of times people forget that you're a local government, you're not a private company. I don't care that your great granddaddy started the utility. You're still a local government. Okay. These are still public funds that you're dealing with. And people seem to forget that whenever they're running their utility because you're there not to find a way to make the business profit. You're there to provide a service that is necessary for every single citizen because public service, that's what we're involved in. Don't forget that we are involved in public service as, dealing with local government utilities, right? And so being a public servant, you have to remember that you need to be doing what's best for the community and what's best for everyone involved. It's not about making sure that you have the best utility per se. It's making sure that you have the best service being provided to customers at the best price. Um, and one thing that Megan said was just follow best practices. Well, Ross, what are best practices? We're all here at the TAUD conference, and they are a fantastic resource for finding best practices and asking questions. Most of the time, the utilities that we don't get involved in is because they're talking to organizations such as TAUD, or they're calling us before they're having issues and asking questions before the problem arises. A lot of times when I can get involved with utility and I ask them something, I'm like, well, who told you that you could do this? Or why are you doing this? Who have you been talking to? And they say, well, no one. This is just the way we've been doing it forever. There's a utility, doesn't exist anymore, but not too far from where we live out in Nashville. That, I mean, the best way to describe it is by the time we got involved, it was a dumpster fire of a utility. It was awful. It was miserable. And they came in front of our board, the T board, and they were asked questions. And people say this all the time, and I don't think a lot of people realize that it's true, that how often we hear it, but it's, well, that's how we've always done it. Like, yeah, that's kind of a joke. People don't think it actually happens, but no, seriously, like this guy got in front of our board and said, well, that's how daddy did it. That's how daddy did it isn't a good answer, especially when you're dealing with something that's potentially criminal. Just word for the wise there. Yeah.
One thing I wanted to add too, in terms of best practices, our office pretty soon on the website is going to have a brand new utility manual. That'll be a really great resource for everyone. It was actually adopted at our most recent T-Board meeting. And within that, we're also going to have a one-pager on just some best practices that our office suggests. So that'll be a resource that you guys can look for coming soon to our website.
Yeah, it's a joy to read. It's going to be a lot of fun for anyone who wants to pick that up and read it, but it really will be a great resource and I do recommend it. But yeah. So next question, and this is going to be a huge stickler, and I think a lot of people are going to have thoughts about this, and I'm fortunate that we're not the ones in the crosshairs about this. So what sort of impacts do we anticipate due to the large amount of the ARP funds that are being pumped into the state? So, we recognize that there's a $1.35 billion investment coming down from the feds through TDEC to all the utilities. How do we anticipate dealing with that large amount of money coming into the state? Anyone?
Yeah, I would say so. As Ross mentioned, I'm West Tennessee utility analyst, and so if any of y'all are familiar with West Tennessee and Blue Oval City, that's been a very large project in that area, and it's not technically related to the ARPA funds, but just in the idea, in the same vein of that, large capital projects hopefully will take place using the ARPA dollars, and so the obvious one that a lot of people are going to see will be an increase in depreciation. I think we may touch on depreciation a little bit later. But I know that's a big concern for a lot of utilities, especially smaller rural utilities. Yeah, it's great that I got all this grant dollars or all this ARPA money, but now I'm left to face the bill of whatever depreciation is going to be now that I've increased my capital assets. And I understand that, and it can be difficult. But that's where it's important to have a long-term financial plan. You shouldn't be adding necessarily capital assets to your system that aren't going to benefit the customers or add new customers onto the system. And so the burden of depreciation, the idea behind that is that it should be borne by the new customers or the customers that are on the system. And so to Ross's point of being a monopoly and providing a vital service, it's important to allocate that depreciation cost to the new customers that are being added onto your system. Like I said, I think we'll touch on that a little bit later, but I see where that's probably a large concern for a lot of the utilities here in Tennessee.
And I think while there may be a major hit on depreciation, I think with accurate rate planning and setting and using rate consultants, again, to go back to that first question, I think that can be mitigated.
Because on that note, a lot of the reason that this money is needed, so I mean, this money is being used in multiple ways, right? You can be using it. I know that TDEC is really pushing that asset management plan, so there's a decent amount of money going to that. Then there's a decent amount of money going to repair and maintenance of current assets, and then there's some capital construction for new stuff. There's not necessarily as much of that, but the repair and maintenance thing is really what I want to focus on. For utilities that are relying on this TDEC ARP money, right? If you're relying on that to fix your infrastructure because you don't have the cash available to fix the infrastructure, I'm going to go ahead and say that 9 times out of 10, that's because there was poor financial planning, right? If you know that your car isn't going to last forever, you make sure that you have the money eventually to fix your car, to buy a new car, right? You don't just hope that the federal government is going to throw you $1.35 billion so you can fix all your stuff, because that's not going to happen again. So now it's Ross. We're getting free money. Why do we have to pay for it through depreciation? What part of you can't rely on the government throwing you $1.35 billion to fix your infrastructure is difficult to understand? Because if you don't adequately save and plan to have this money in the future, when all this stuff that y'all are building right now fails, because it's gonna, if you're not making that plan right now, where's that money gonna come from? And then we're going to be sitting back where we are, where water loss is out, it's really high. You're going to have I&I problems across the state, and the local government isn't going to have the funds to do it. So that's why we're there. We have that boogeyman depreciation. Ooh, everyone thinks the depreciation is the reason for all of their financial woes, and it's not. Y'all probably have heard my depreciation presentation before. It's fun. But I mean, I go over why depreciation isn't the boogeyman. It's one of the biggest financial tools that you have. And I know that most of y'all don't believe me, but it's just true because math. But you really need to understand that we're pushing these financial things in front of y'all to make sure that, sure, it's difficult. The pill to swallow is difficult for you to make sure that your utility is adequately funded now. But the reason that you're adequately funding it now is so your kids aren't going to struggle, your grandkids aren't going to struggle, their kids aren't going to struggle. Because a lot of the issues we're facing today is because issues from 30, 40 years ago, the can's just been kicked. And now we've really needed this $1.35 billion to fix issues because that can's been kicked and no one really wanted to fix the issues as they were occurring. So all that to say, I really don't, we might talk about depreciation later, but I think y'all get sick of me here. Y'all get sick of me saying that word because I do talk about it every time I'm in front of y'all. Okay. So here's another one. This is tough, and I kind of mentioned in the previous what I was previously saying, and it's about water loss. The TBOR is responsible for the oversight of water loss, and water loss is difficult. Especially in East Tennessee, we have issues out in West Tennessee, but the geography is different. The topography is different. But water loss is important, right? And we do get criticism. Because what we say is if you're losing 40% or more of the water that you're trying to sell, that's bad. And we get criticism on that, which I think is kind of crazy, because if you're running any type of business and you're just throwing 40% of your goods out the window before you even sell them, that's not great. But for some reason, people want to argue with me about the 40%. And then people always say, well, you got to flush. Well, you don't have to flush 40% of your water. Let's be clear. And so let's say that you're flushing 10%. Okay. Well, that still means you're losing 30%. You're losing a third of your product. And I understand there is unavoidable water loss. Absolutely. It is never going to be perfect. It's never, ever going to be perfect. And I get that. But water loss needs to be really be evaluated and looked at. So what does the TBOR do when it comes to water loss? Go ahead. I want in, Nate.
With currently under TBOR, let's say y'all file an annual information report, which hopefully everyone's filing. It's been out for several years now. And so you would file your annual information report, you would record the amount of water you either purchased or produced, and then you'd also report the amount that you sold. To Ross's point, anybody over the 40% water loss threshold would then get referred to board staff. We would send out an email or some type of communication saying, hey, you've fallen under or you're above the 40%. We're going to need you to fill out an annual or an AWWA sheet with a third-party expert of some type Once we get that back, we'll review it. A lot of them are very similar when it comes to the type of loss. It's just the amount of loss and the financial burden that it's causing on the system varies. And once we review that AWWA sheet, you should be getting an email at some point from board staff saying, we're going to need a financial plan and a managerial plan essentially to remedy the water loss. To Ross's point, we're never going to expect it to be a 0%. That would be great if we could get to that point, but that's just not feasible. And one thing I would like to add is the two things I hear surprisingly a lot when talking to people on the phone who have gone through the water loss process or are in the middle of it. The first one is there a lot of times they're very quick to admit, yeah, we knew we had a water loss issue, which isn't surprising if you're losing over 40%. But the second one is I've heard time and time again from people that say, going through this process, even though there maybe wasn't an official TBOR order that got sent out, but just working with our office and having to contract with AWWA and meet with engineer or some other type of expert to create a long-term plan to remedy water loss. Um, they're always so excited the next year to report that they've lowered it. Even if it's just a few percentage points, but they said, a lot of times I hear we put in zone metering and we were able to identify exactly which branch of the system is losing the water. And it's really working well. And we're able to fix 3 large leaks that we didn't even know about. And now our water loss percentage is, 5% lower or whatever the case is for individual systems. But I hear that a lot just talking to people on the phone after they've gone through some type of water loss mitigation planning and process, that they're always really excited to report back that it actually is working, and it's a noticeable difference in the numbers.
So, earlier I mentioned that the TBOR has roughly, I think it's 80-ish financial distress cases, which, I mean, it is a lot, right? But it's not the vast majority. One of our main focuses is to close those cases because, the previously it was the Water and Wastewater Financing Board and the Utility Management Review Board, and these boards combined to create the TBOR, the Tennessee Board of Utility Regulation. And so whenever we did that, all the old cases just carried over to this new board. And so a lot of these old cases have been open for a long time. They're names that I've seen on, the agendas for years now. And I'm sick and tired of seeing them still on my list, right? I just want to be done and let's get that number down, because it's the best way to say this. It's embarrassing. We're a body of the legislature. The Comptroller's office is a body of the legislature. And so a lot of times there are legislators who are very interested in utilities. Okay. And so when they call me and they say, Ross, tell me about the TBOR, how many cases, like what's going on? And when I say, well, there's 80-ish financial distress cases, they look at that and they don't think, oh, that means that we have 370 really healthy utilities. No, they say we have how many financially distressed utilities? And it's embarrassing because I think that Tennessee has strong utilities. We have some of the most financially strong utilities in my opinion, in the country, especially this region. And I think part of that is because the way that the TBOR regulates finances for utilities. But it is embarrassing to say, we have 80 financially distressed utilities. So one of my big initiatives is I want to see that number go down. And so with that being the next big initiative of the TBOR, what are some of the things that the utilities that are under us can expect in order to get that case log closed?
Thank you. I would say if a utility has been under the TBOR, which was formerly the UMRB and the WWFB, we're probably going to order or ask the board to order a new rate study, and then ensure that that utility actually institutes that rate study, and it's pretty significant in order to get them out of that financial distress and hopefully decrease the amount that we have in our backlog.
And that actually made me think of something. I will say, I'm really glad to be doing this and not have a PowerPoint. I don't really do well with PowerPoint. I just kind of like to talk off the top of my head and just roll with it. So I said something earlier, and then Megan saying that, it made me think of this. I talked about the legislature briefly. Okay. And so I'm kind of shifting gears here a little bit. I talked about the legislature briefly. I implore y'all, I challenge y'all to call your legislator. Make a relationship with your legislator. Okay. TAUD does a fantastic job at monitoring, all the legislation that's going through. And but there are some legislators that when they're asked a question about a utility bill or something like that, they'll say, well, hold on, I want to talk to the utility people in my area. And they'll get on the horn with whether it's a board president or a manager of a utility, I don't know. But the legislator will call them. You need to have that relationship with your legislator. Because the comptroller always says, whenever the legislature's in session, they're either doing something for you or they're doing something to you. And, there were some things in the previous session that I know that TAUD had a pretty strong opinion on. And so luckily they were able to get involved and really help guide the conversation around those. But it would help even more if your legislator felt comfortable enough to call you and say, hey, someone's throwing this bill together. I'm really not too sure what it's doing. What do you know about it? And then you are able to help influence their opinion on something that they might not be the most educated about because they're not expected to be experts in everything. And so really, if y'all take one thing away from this entire presentation, it is to call your legislator and start a relationship with them. Because a lot of people think, oh, my state representative, my state senator, they don't have the time for me. They don't want to hear from me. No, because they like to be elected. So they're going to make time for the people that are important in their community, right? So, if you know someone who knows them, try to get them to set up a lunch or sometime, or just call their office, send them an email, say you'd love to get together for some coffee or something. All it takes is 15, 20 minutes just to get coffee so they know you, they have the contact information. So the next time a piece of legislation comes out that, y'all aren't comfortable with, your legislator knows who to call and ask questions. And I think that is such a great resource that a lot of people fail to utilize is, again, the legislature. I mean, I'm a body of the legislature. I wouldn't have any power unless the legislature gave it to me. And, if y'all really hate me that much, then you can start a relationship with your legislator and get him to legislate me out of a job. And so they're totally able to shut down the T-board if they want to. So, but seriously, get a relationship with your legislator. It's really important. And that's not to say that TAUD doesn't do an effective job. They do a great job, but it can always be strengthened by you having a personal relationship with your legislator. Now, here's another topic that people hate us for, and it's my favorite. See, I hate depreciation because I hate talking about it, even though I think it's great. I really like this one because it normally gets people's blood boiling, and that's mergers, right? Ooh, mergers. Why are y'all making me do this? Why are you making me take this utility? Why are y'all getting rid of my utility? I love mergers so much. You want to know why? Because there's no reason to hate them because it only helps your customers. And I never understand why people don't want to help their community. That's what it boils down to. Why you, as a public servant, don't want to do what's in the best interest of your community. So, on the note of mergers, let's just open it up. I want to hear what y'all have to say about mergers and why they're important and why we pursue them.
Yeah, I mean, I really think it's largely simply focused on what Ross just said is we're there in the best interest of the customers. Now that looks a little bit like as far rates, what's the lowest rate for your customer, but also about the service and the quality of the service. We don't want to necessarily implement a merger where, hey, the rates are a little bit lower, but the quality of service is just non-existent. Right. And so that's an important aspect that we consider. But mergers are not something that we just lightly walk into. It's happens due to consistent and long-term issues, issues that we're talking about right now that are easily solved just through the implementation of policies, procedures, general practices, talking with third-party experts, talking with other utilities in your area. I think that's a great thing to do as well. And so when a merger is being discussed and when a merger is implemented, it's due to a long-term financial poor health And then the second one is just it's in the best interest of the customers. And so to Ross's point, that's why y'all are here. That's why we're here, is to better serve the citizens of Tennessee and the customers of utilities.
Okay. I'll let you. Okay. The table has started recently asking utility board to come to the board. Can you sort of address why that started and what you're doing when they show? Sure. Yeah. So what Don just asked is that the T-Bor has recently started asking utilities that are under us to send board members to come in front of the T-Bor to answer questions. Really wasn't a big practice under the UMRB or the WWFB. So Don's question is essentially why? Why has this started? Why has the T-Bor been asking for these governing body members to come answer questions? Well, usually that doesn't happen every single time there's a case. Let me be clear. It doesn't, it's not like you're under us and you automatically got to send someone. However, it's whenever there's really bigger issues going on that the T-Bor says, you know what, tell them to come to our next meeting because we want to talk to them. And it's because us as board staff, we can't get adequate information, usually from your utility, about what's happening and why there are issues to begin with. So the T-Board, we'll go to the T-Board and we say, we don't really understand what's happening. We don't know we're having bad information. So the D-Board could say, well, tell the Board of Commissioners to come up here and we'll talk to them, because at the end of the day, the Board of Commissioners, y'all are the ones responsible for the utility, right? You hire the manager who then runs the utility, but the onus is on the Board Commissioners to make sure that you have a strong utility. And so that's where you have to find a good manager who will make sure that happens. Another side of things, but not that was the wrong choice of words. No, it's really to ask questions to the utility commissioner of what are you doing? Why are you doing it? Why is this a problem? So now on the other side of it is, well, what if the order says that, yeah, y'all have to, these utility commissioners have to come in front of us, and then just no one shows up? Well, there's a whole host of things, because one, we can ask y'all to come, and if you just don't listen to us, I can't really do anything because I don't have any power unless the T-Board gives me that power. So we could subpoena, and we have subpoenaed utility commissioners in the past, and so we can subpoena you to come. And then if you don't listen to a subpoena, that's bad, because that's a legal thing. You will be charged. But I don't want to go too far. I don't like to be too talk about the penalties too much. Let's just focus on why the commissioners have to come in front of the board, and it's to answer questions because we don't know what's happening. And if you're a utility district commissioner or you're a governing body member, a city councilman or whatever, and you don't know what's happening at the utility, we have bigger issues. You're as a governing body member, you don't need to be in every single nook and cranny, every single thing that's going on, but you should be able to paint a pretty broad picture, especially about pretty important things at the utility. And so, if the T-Board asks you to come in front of them, just be prepared to answer questions and just inform us why. So, one example that I have is at one of the previous meetings, whenever there's a investigative report that comes out against a utility, we have to bring it in front of the T-Board. And so the T-Board looks and it's like, oh, there's all these deficiencies. There were no internal controls. The board was aware that management was acting foul and they didn't do anything about it, and so on and so forth. And so we had one of these investigative reports come up, and the T-Board said, we want to hear from the board commissioners as to why all of this stuff was happening. And so I will say, unfortunately, not all of them showed up. We didn't subpoena them, but they were ordered to come. And one of them did. And, we tried to get more information about what was going on. And we did gather some information, but we left, in my opinion, with more question marks than answers. And so that kind of just helps us when we have a conversation with the governing body of the utility. It helps us understand the situation at the utility a little bit more So we're able to figure out the best way to handle situations, because every utility is unique and every problem that we see is pretty unique. But so there's the answer to that. So let's shift gears a little bit here. Local government finance in the Comptroller's office, that's the actual division that we're all part of. And so outside of these guys just being utility analysts, but they're also financial analysts with local government finance. And in that is they are the ones that review the budgets and approve the budgets. And, we have a lot of experience in doing that. So one of the things that we do is we give out budget certificates. And a budget certificate pretty much says, hey, you did everything correctly. Awesome. We're recognizing you for it. And so a question that we get sometimes is, why didn't we get a budget certificate? So does anyone want to talk about the budget process and budget certificates and just how we handle budgets?
Well, to start, I think the main reason a lot of utilities don't get the certificate is because a lack of knowledge and, well, knowing what it is, but also the requirements. And for utilities, it's actually pretty easy. Uh, you need to make sure you have adopted your budget before your fiscal year end, submit it to our office within 15 days of adoption. You need to produce a positive statutory change in that position. And I believe that's um, pretty much it for utilities. And I think our office does a good job at providing resources as far as the budget process goes. We've got a checklist online that you can go and you can follow step by step um, to know everything that you need to submit to our office. We've got uh, Excel schedules, budget templates, and of course, at any time, the LGF analyst for your region is happy to help you with that. But I think that's all I got.
I think to add to that, my question, if I've ever gotten a call about that, is generally, have you read the previous year's budget letter? Generally, and I know this year specifically, we've tried to make it pretty clear in addressing specific items that we note in the letter, and the final sentence will say something to the effect of, if you can't do this, you won't get a budget certificate. And like Charlie mentioned, we do have a budget manual online, which is a great resource. And call us, ask us. We're happy to help. Again, reach out to us before we reach out to you in terms of, hey, why didn't I qualify for this? What do you need to see next year? What do I need to do differently?
And
No, go ahead.
yeah, just one. I wanted to add one more thing, and it's more of just a continuation of Charlie. What Charlie said is that y'all can submit, especially for utilities, really for your entire local government, but especially utilities. Y'all can submit an entire budget that pending any other issues that you're not under the board. That's another requirement for the certificate. But pending any other issues that are in the budget as far as structure of the budget is concerned, y'all can submit an entire budget using the documents we have on our website that fulfill all the requirements. And so you don't have to create anything new. You don't have to go find information from other parties. We're the ones who review and approve the budgets. We also are the ones who give the certificates. And so we not only provide a checklist, but we also provide documents that go through detailed from cover letter all the way through detailed schedules of everything that y'all need to submit to our office on an annual basis in order to get an approved budget, but even more specifically, a budget that would be applicable for a budget certificate. So I just wanted to add that.
And I have something to add there too. So I also see a lot of these budgets, okay? And I like to think that I have pretty decent reading comprehension and that I understand numbers pretty well. And sometimes I struggle understanding making heads or tails of a budget submission. Okay, a lot of times it just doesn't make sense to me the way that it's laid out. Luckily, we have a lot of resources that makes it a lot easier in my opinion, but I understand if you've been doing the same budget format for the last 50 years, why you won't want to change it. It's fine because there's no required method of what it needs to look like. It just has to meet certain criteria. However, I say that if I'm struggling to understand it, something tells me that the people voting on it also might kind of struggle to understand it. And if I'm seeing that, and if I'm seeing a utility that stays financially distressed, their budget is just difficult to understand, I'm looking at that and thinking, I don't know if this governing body is actually paying much attention to what the utility is doing, or are they just letting management run, run the entire utility without really any oversight. So keep in mind that, sure, submitting a poor budget, as in the way that it looks, just looks very unprofessional and bad. It's a reflection on your utility. Okay. And when it comes to when we're dealing with the utility, we have to kind of get a frame of reference of what kind of utility it is that we're dealing with here. Is it someone who respects the relationship that's between us and wants to submit something that's professional and easy to understand to make it easy on us? Or is it someone that, photocopies something kind of sideways, slides it on in, the numbers are a little fuzzy? That doesn't look good. It's unprofessional. And so when your customers come to us and request copies of stuff and they see that that's the stuff that you're pumping to the state, it's not a good look on y'all either. So keep in mind, there's more to just getting an approved budget, but there's also about having a respectful relationship with, between our offices. Because let me tell you, if y'all ever ask for something from me, I'm not going to send you some like sideways photocopy of something that y'all need, because I just don't think that's right.
One
However,
more thing.
yeah.
I was going to say, make sure to include contact information. That's left out all the time, and that's really important for us to be able to communicate with y'all. And I left out over half the time is just like a phone number. And that's something that's really easy to do. Just include that in the submission.
On that note, that reminds me, one time, me, Nate, and I think it was Adam from our office, we were traveling to a utility. We were doing a little circuit, going to a bunch of these utilities, and there was it is so important that we have up-to-date information, everyone. We got the address of where we were supposed to go from like an old like audit or something. We were like, yeah, this should still be the office. Well, it wasn't, and we're in pretty rural Tennessee where there's no phone service. And we're just driving around, and like I was kind of fearful for my life, because like when there's like three guys in suits just like driving around somewhere they don't look like they're supposed to be, it's never really great. So please, like for my safety, it would be really awesome if we just had up-to-date information all of the time. But regardless, I could ramble on and on and on. We could talk all the time about great practices, what to do, and, what we look for in utilities. But the bottom line is this: despite how much I can be up here and talk at you and talk about all the things that I think that, utilities could be doing better, the skinny of it is this: Tennessee utilities are strong. Tennessee utilities are strong because of the governing bodies of all the utilities that are there and the management that the governing body chooses. Tennessee utilities are strong because of groups like TAUD, and Tennessee utilities are going to continue to be strong as long as everyone remembers that this is about public service. This isn't about local politics. This isn't about doing favors for anyone, but this is about public service and remaining, true and just honest with your customers and working with us and making sure that you remember that what you're doing is a necessary service that is all, we all know it's a thankless job, right? It's talked about all the time how what we do in the background, to make sure that, you can turn the sink on and be, content with what comes out of it. It's a thankless job. And so just know that despite how mad I can come across, I don't know if I come across mad. I really hope that's not it. But no, I appreciate what y'all do so much, because I know that it's difficult and there's a lot of stuff that y'all have to do. And I do appreciate it. And I'm very appreciative for whenever I do get to work with utilities. And after it's all said and done, they end up thanking me and they end up thanking us to say, yeah, we were nervous about it at first, but after we got through all this, everything's going pretty well. So I just want you to know that I do believe that Tennessee is in a great position, and there's plenty of reasons that is. But I think that this conference and this organization is one of the largest reasons for it. Um, does anyone else have any closing remarks before we open up for questions? No? All right. I'm happy to take any questions y'all may have. Like I said, I don't, is that, okay, we got two. Awesome. I love, okay.
Thank you, Ross, and your team. Great presentation. Over the years, when utilities are financially distressed, you typically recommend a rate increase, by a certified third party, et cetera, et cetera. Last year, legislation was passed that kind of opens the door up for developers to come before TBOR in situations where the utility might be requiring a developer to contribute more than what the developer thinks they should contribute for expansions of infrastructure to serve a subdivision. Middle Tennessee, we're getting hit really hard with growth. Many utilities are now implementing capacity fees. Some of those capacity fees may not be based upon sound studies. So if a developer comes before TBOR and were to contest a capacity fee, what would you anticipate TBOR's action would be against or for that utility?
Sure. So I think, keep in mind, I'm not on the T-Board, I just serve as staff. But if I had to look into my crystal ball as what would happen, T-Board would treat this like any other rate case, and we'd look at the utility and say, why is this capacity fee set the way that it is? And if they say, well, we did the math and we crunched the numbers here, or well, our rate consultant put it together and said that this is an adequate capacity fee. T-Board's not going to blink twice at that. They're going to say, okay, perfect, you did the math. But I have had situations, not with capacity fees, but with other rate things where the utility just says, yeah, I don't know. We just really kind of said it like that and hope that it would be good. Yeah, that's not going to be okay. So the T-Board isn't going to say, hey, you're not allowed to do capacity fees. What they're going to say is you need to bring in a third party to confirm what the capacity fee would be. So if you're starting to do, some sort of capacity fee or anything like that, just make sure that there is some sound logic and math behind what it is. It doesn't necessarily need to be from a third party because, you do have the ability to set these things internally. But if we as staff, or luckily the T-Board is made up of, the majority of it, they're either a governing body member or manager of a utility. And so, these individuals will be able to look at something and say, this doesn't really sound like a sound practice to me. So just make sure that what you're doing has some sort of rational basis behind it.
I'm concerned that my ratepayers could be asked to take over the expenses for a distressed utility. What is the process that where a utility would be required to take over another utility?
Sure. So great question. And I'm actually so glad you said that. You have my professional guarantee. That might not be worth nothing to y'all, but that's fine because the T-Board would agree. We would never pursue a merger that is going to negatively affect your customers. Okay. If we were going to say you need to do a merger, but you're going to have to increase the rates on your customers by 20% to be able to subsidize that neighboring utility, we would never go for that. The point of the merger is for it to be a net neutral or a net positive for your current base and a net positive for the new people that you're acquiring. So I want to be very clear. We never want to see a massive subsidy of the strong utility on the weak utility. I understand that it might take some time, through some cross subsidization to get there, but no, your current customer should never have to suffer because your neighbor didn't know how to run a utility. However, that doesn't answer your question. I did just want to preface with that. So here's what happens. Bad utility, they come under the T-Board. We look at them, we say, we think you're a ripe candidate for a merger. We say you need to go get a feasibility study done. Ross, what is a feasibility study? Well, it's really not defined. It's just kind of one of those things, when you see it. So that bad utility brings in a third-party consultant, and that third-party consultant puts together something to say, yes, we think this merger is feasible, or no, we don't. So I take that feasibility study, and then me and one of my staff, we would then go to the service area of the utility in question. And if it's not in the service area, it's going to be just outside of it because there's probably not somewhere to have a public hearing in the service area. But we go and we have a public hearing. And that's when you should have customers or concerned parties come out and voice their opinion and say, we think that this is a great idea. That never happens. It's people coming to us saying, this is a really bad idea. We don't like this. And we don't really ever get told why they don't like it, other than like, politically, it just makes me mad. The state shouldn't have this power. I never really get to see the math of why it shouldn't work out, but that's regardless. So the public hearing happens, and I get yelled at for a minute. And then I go back to the T-board and I say, hey, listen, got the feasibility study. We think this is a good idea. We had the public hearing. People are mad about it, but we never really heard a good argument why. Or maybe I will hear a great argument. And then I go to the T-board and say, hey, this merger shouldn't happen. But have the public hearing, go to the T-board. T-board says, great, we did the feasibility study. We had the public hearing. Now we're going to order the two utilities to enter into merger negotiations. So now the two utilities have to come to table and have a merger negotiation about what everything's going to look at after all the dice fall or cards fall. So then after the merger negotiation, the merger would essentially just go through. If for some reason neither party isn't acting in good faith, then we would refer the matter to the Attorney General's office for enforcement through the Chancery Court. But I mean, the biggest thing is if someone doesn't want a merger to happen, they need to be able to show in a professional manner why it's bad, not just, hey, we don't want to do this. But in short, I mean, the main highlight of what I want to say is your current customers should not and will not suffer because of a merger. That is just not the goal. That's just never the goal. So, because whenever you take two utilities and put them together, there's nothing stopping the good utility from running a separate set of books that still manages. You don't have to like completely push all of the books and everything together. You can have a completely separate rate structure and everything. So it doesn't have to be a true merger in that everything's just kind of pushed together. Everything can remain separate until the long run when it all coincides together. All right. And that appears to be kind of the end of where we're at. I really appreciate everyone's time here. There is one, I'll just catch you after. It looks like we're getting kind of caught for time here, but I appreciate everyone. Thank you so much for your time. It's always fun being here, and you let me know if we can do anything for you.
We're going to take about a 10-minute break. Make sure you get your badges scanned in the back if you do need those CE credits.